He's got a bit of star, 'cause he said he based his whole style on Aerosmith. Do you still remember the voice that ignited an entire generation from the wild energy of Whole Lotta Love to the mystical flight of Stairway to Heaven? Robert Plant was never just a singer. He awakened something primal in the soul of every listener. His presence on stage redefined what it meant to be a rock legend. But behind that voice, behind the wild curls and unshakable confidence, who was he really now at the age of 76? His daughter has finally broken the silence, confirming what fans have quietly suspected. For years before we begin, we want to hear from you on a scale from 0 to 100. How would you rate Robert Plant as a rock legend? What does Robert Plant mean to you? Your voice truly matters. After about the first 3 minutes, I realized where we were and what we were doing. And it became before he became the electrifying frontman of Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant was simply a boy growing up in the industrial heart of England, born on August 20th, 1948 in the Black Country, a region near Birmingham scarred by the aftermath of World War II and choked by post-war pollution plants. Early years were shaped by a mix of grit, hardship, and unshakable resilience. The environment was far from idyllic, yet it nurtured in him a sense of toughness and adaptability that would later define his powerful stage persona. Despite the grim surroundings, the Plant household was filled with an unexpected warmth, brought to life by his mother Annie Celia Plant, a woman he later described as suitably and joyfully combustible. Annie infused their modest home with joy music and movement. Her presence was a beacon of energy. Her singing, dancing, and spirited nature created a vibrant, almost magical escape from the gray industrial world outside their doors. Her Romani heritage added a unique cultural flair to their family life and played a vital role in shaping young Robert's sensitivity to rhythm, mysticism, and emotional expression. Robert often reminisced about his mother's thick, wild curls, a trait he inherited, and later became one of his iconic visual trademarks in a conversation with GQ. He recalled with affection, "My mother. Her hair was very, very thick. She couldn't even get a brush through it, but her influence ran deeper than appearance." Annie's artistic and free-spirited essence laid the foundation for Robert's own musical and emotional instincts, leaving an indelible mark that stayed with him even in the height of Led Zeppelin's fame. She was his spark, the rhythm before the music, the heart behind the howl. His father, also named Robert, stood in stark contrast. A civil engineer and Royal Air Force veteran, Plant Sr. was a man of order, discipline, and traditional values. He set aside his passion for playing the violin to provide for the family, embodying sacrifice and duty, while he shared a love of cycling and football, particularly the Wolverhampton Wanderers with his son. He struggled to relate to Robert's growing fascination with music in that era. Music was not seen as a real profession, and he envisioned a more secure and respectable path for his son, accountancy. Yielding to his father's wishes, young Robert enrolled in a finance and accounting program at the London School of Economics. But even a scholarship couldn't keep him tethered to a life of ledgers and forecasts. His heart wasn't in numbers. It beat in rhythm and melody. He found the classroom stifling, a prison to a soul, aching for freedom. After a short stint, he left the university behind, lured back by his ever-deepening passion for the blues and rock music scene. Still, his brief academic journey wasn't in vain. As author Axel Hunter pointed out, Plant's exposure to financial literacy later benefited Led Zeppelin immensely. He was instrumental in suggesting cost-saving strategies, like renting a private jet as a mobile hotel during tours, a move that showcased his hidden knack for logistics and strategy, complementing his flair for music. Yet, his decision to fully embrace music came at a cost. As a teenager, Plant found himself increasingly at odds with his parents. He spent long hours in local blues clubs like the Seven Stars in Starbridge, soaking up the raw emotional energy of Delta blues. His involvement with local bands like the Crawling King Snakes only intensified the rift at home, despite their love for him. His parents could not accept the seemingly uncertain future he was. Choosing tensions ran high, and eventually, at the age of 17, Robert left home to avoid further conflict. It was a heartbreakingly lonely and uncertain time. Plant. Not yet a man wandered through the ache of being misunderstood, exiled from the love that raised him. But it was also the moment that forged his independence. In fire years later, in interviews with The Guardian and BBC's Desert Island Discs, Plant would reflect on the emotional toll of those years, his need to follow his instincts even at the expense of familiar harmony. Fortunately, time healed the divide, and he was able to reconcile with his parents as his career took off, but those early struggles were not forgotten. They became part of the emotional fabric of his songwriting, his raw performances, and his defiance of convention. In truth, Robert Plant's childhood was not just the origin of a musical career. It was the birthplace of a restless spirit, a refusal to conform, and a deep well of creativity, carved by pain, rebellion, and quiet yearning. The collision between a traditional father, a free-spirited mother, and a boy with music in his soul helped mold one of rock's most compelling figures. And it all began in a modest home, in a scarred yet resilient corner of England, where a young boy first dreamed with his ears wide open and his heart beating to a different drum. I think it's such a fantastic song. You ask me. I forget how Robert Plant's journey into the world of music was as exhilarating as it was tumultuous. At just 15 years old, he was helping friends in a local band called the Jurymen. When fate intervened, the band's lead singer fell ill before a gig at the Bull's Head pub, and Plant stepped in. Nervous and unsure, he took the stage, and something sparked, though he later confessed to being too frightened to make eye contact with the audience. Others remember him as electrifying. Even then, that night marked the beginning of his life on stage, and it would never be the same. From that point, Plant immersed himself in the local blues scene. Bands like the Crawling King Snakes helped shape his sound, and his stage presence matured with each gig. Yet, as his confidence grew, so did the emotional distance from his parents. The rift between home and heart widened. His father, a staunch believer in traditional careers, wanted him to pursue accountancy. His mother, though more artistic, worried for his future. Arguments became frequent, and Plant, longing for freedom, eventually left home. At 17, it was a painful severing of ties that would never fully mend, but then came a call that changed everything. In 1968, legendary guitarist Jimmy Page was searching for a frontman to lead a new band when singer Terry Reid declined the offer. He recommended a young vocalist from Birmingham. Robert Plant Page took the suggestion, and after hearing Plant sing, knew he'd found the voice he needed. Plant, though initially intimidated by Page and bassist John Paul Jones, joined the band. That group would soon be renamed Led Zeppelin. Their first performance under the new name happened on one of the most personal days of Plant's life. His wedding day, he married Maureen Wilson, a nurse who had supported him emotionally and financially during his early uncertain years. That same night, Led Zeppelin took the stage, fusing two seismic shifts in his life into a single, unforgettable moment. But while his musical life exploded into legend, his personal life would soon face tragedy as the band soared to superstardom. Tragedy loomed on the horizon in 1975 while vacationing in Greece between tour stops. Robert and his family were involved in a devastating car accident. Conflicting reports circulated. Some claimed Plant was behind the wheel. Others said Maureen was either way. The crash left both parents injured and deeply shaken. Their children were safe, but Maureen suffered life-threatening injuries. Robert himself was confined to a wheelchair for months, yet even in that state he continued creating. He recorded vocals for the album Presence, including the emotionally intense Achilles. Last Stand, a song born from both physical and psychological pain, but nothing could prepare him for what came next. In 1977, during a U.S. tour, Plant received a phone call that shattered his world. His 5-year-old son, Carrack, had fallen ill with a stomach virus within hours. The illness escalated, and by the end of the day, Carrack was gone. It was sudden, cruel, and absolutely heartbreaking. The pain was so deep it rendered everything else meaningless. Plant later admitted he collapsed to the ground, overcome with a grief that no parent should ever endure. He said that day he lost not only a son, but a part of himself. The loss of Carrack marked a turning point that sent Plant into emotional isolation. He returned to the family's remote farmhouse, canceling tours and distancing himself from music. Where once there had been fire, there was only smoke in interviews. He spoke of sitting alone, staring at the walls, unable to understand how the world could keep turning his voice once a symbol of power grew quiet. Even the thought of singing felt like betrayal worse still. The pressures of fame only added to his pain. While fans celebrated Led Zeppelin's rise, Plant grieved in silence, trapped between the public's expectations and the personal devastation that no spotlight could touch. The stage. Once his sanctuary had become a stage of ghosts, but again it was friendship that pulled him back. His bandmate, John Bonham, refused to let him disappear. He brought comfort, solidarity, and a reminder that Plant's voice still had meaning. Bonham showed up one morning as Plant was on his way to apply for a teaching job. Hoping to leave music behind, entirely dressed like a chauffeur, Bonham playfully kidnapped him, drove him to a pub, and reminded him what they had built together. It was both absurd and touching. That one act of brotherhood reignited something in Plant, not ambition, but connection. These early tragedies, the accident, the loss of a child, and the internal battle between stage and home became foundational to Plant's artistry. His voice carried more than melody. It carried mourning, longing, and the fragile hope of a soul learning to survive unbearable pain. With every note he sang, not just for fame, but to find healing in the echo. And though time moved forward, the echoes of those losses never truly faded. They shaped the man as much as the music did in every performance. From that point on, there was a shadow beside him, a quiet remembrance of a little boy named Carrack of Dreams, nearly abandoned, and of a man who chose to keep singing. Not because he had to, but because it was the only way he knew to keep going. Bands of people. You know, Last night was the first time that I stepped in front of 7. The years following Led Zeppelin's disbandment in 1980 saw Robert Plant standing at a crossroads, grappling with profound grief loss of direction and the uncertain path of reinvention. The death of drummer and dear friend John Bonham not only ended the band but ripped a hole in Plant's soul. Led Zeppelin was over when Bonzo died, Plant once said. And for him, that loss wasn't just musical. It was personal crushing and final. In the silence that followed, Plant considered walking away from music altogether. The lure of a quieter life, perhaps as a teacher, seemed appealing. He'd already toyed with the idea after losing his son in one unforgettable anecdote. Plant recalled heading to apply for a job at a Waldorf school when John Bonham intercepted him outside the gates wearing a chauffeur's hat and sitting in a 6-door Mercedes Bonham, drove him to a nearby pub, pleading with him to return to the one thing that had once set his soul on fire, music. Moved by this gesture of friendship, Plant returned, not just to music, but to himself with Bonham's passing. Soon after, that moment became sacred, a final push from a lost brother that saved him from vanishing into grief. Plant's early solo career was hesitant but heartfelt. His debut solo album Pictures at 11 in 1982 was both a declaration of independence and a tribute to his past. It was during this time that Phil Collins stepped in, not just as a drummer but as a friend. Collins played on Plant's first 2 solo albums and toured with him, offering not only percussive brilliance but emotional support for Plant. This collaboration was a lifeline. He later said that Collins pulled him out of the gloom. Their partnership extended beyond the studio. Collins's energy reminded Plant that even after devastation, life and music could bloom again. But the 1990s brought another wave of fear. A voice specialist in London delivered a grim prognosis. Plant's vocal cords were deteriorating. You may not be able to express surprise in 6 months, the doctor warned, for a man whose identity had been built on soaring vocal lines and explosive range. This was a terrifying revelation. But Plant, as always, fought back, inspired by others like Elton John and Steven Tyler who had overcome similar obstacles. He refused to surrender. He underwent treatment, adjusted his technique, and emerged with a deeper, richer tone that redefined his sound for a new generation. Reinvention became Plant's signature instead of chasing past glories. He leaned into new artistic directions. Albums like Mighty Rearranger and Carry Fire explored global sounds influenced heavily by his love of Indian and Moroccan music. Collaborations with world musicians gave his work a mystical edge. Reflecting his spiritual growth and ever-expanding curiosity, one of the most notable efforts was No Quarter. 1994, a collaboration with Jimmy Page that fused rock with Middle Eastern instrumentation, filmed partially in Morocco in this phase Plant, became a traveler in sound, an elder statesman of rock who saw no borders in music, only bridges, and then came love in 2010. Robert Plant began a relationship with singer-songwriter Patty Griffin. The two not only shared music, but built a quiet life together in Austin, Texas. Their bond, though private, marked a rare chapter of emotional peace for Plant. He called Griffin a true artist of spirit, and credited her with helping him reconnect with joy. They would sing, write, and walk hand in hand under the Texas sky. But like many parts of Plant's life, the peace was fleeting. The couple eventually separated in 2014, and Plant returned to the UK specifically to the Welsh borders, where he found solace in the countryside of his youth. It was here that he crafted Lullaby and the Ceaseless Roar, a reflective and deeply personal album. He described the record as an ode to life-love and the unpredictable journey of existence. That journey had now taken him full circle, from youthful rebellion to seasoned reflection. The hills of Wales, the place he once ran from, had become the sanctuary he ran to, the weight of his losses. His son, his best friend, his voice, his love never truly left, but he carried them differently now, not as chains, but as talismans. He learned to sing with them, not in spite of them, and that may be the greatest reinvention of all. Plant's legacy is more than gold records and iconic riffs. It's about evolution. He resisted becoming a nostalgia act, instead choosing to grow, to change, to challenge himself. He once said, "If I sing Stairway to Heaven again, I might as well dig a hole and jump in for him." The past was a foundation, not a cage. Beyond the music, Plant has also become a symbol of aging. With Grace in his 70s, he continues to perform, to record, and to inspire. His interviews reveal a man at peace with his past, but still hungry for new stories, new melodies. He speaks often of family, of nature, of art. The swagger of youth has been replaced by the wisdom of experience, and somehow it's even more compelling to many. Robert Plant will always be the golden-haired god of Led Zeppelin, but to those who followed his journey, he is something even more powerful, a man who turned pain into poetry, who let the fire of grief forge something enduring and beautiful. His voice, aged and burnished, carries stories that resonate not just because of their pitch, but because of their truth. In 2018, Plant launched the podcast Digging Deep, in which he explored the stories behind his songs. Each episode offered a glimpse into his mind, a mix of memory, humor, and wisdom. Through this new format, he connected with audiences in a different, deeper way. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about meaning. And so, as the sun sets on each stage he graces, Robert Plant doesn't just leave behind echoes of applause. He leaves behind something far richer, a legacy of resilience, reinvention, and real, radiant humanity. If his career began with the wild howl of rock's golden era, it now hums with the quiet strength of someone who has truly lived, from the heartbreak of unimaginable loss to the triumph of finding himself again. Plant's journey mirrors that of so many who have had to rise. After falling, his songs are no longer just soundtracks. They are lifelines, and perhaps that is the true mark of a legend, not just how loud they can roar, but how deeply they can heal. We also got mixed up in quite a gargantuan film now. At 76, Robert Plant lives far from the blinding stage lights that once followed his every move. Instead, he finds comfort in quiet places within the rolling hills of the Welsh countryside, in vinyl records spinning late at night, and most meaningfully, in the quiet bond he shares with his daughter Carmen, Jane Plant, while Plant rarely discusses his family in public. It was Carmen who recently gave fans a rare and intimate glimpse behind the legend's curtain. Carmen, a professional dancer and choreographer, has spent most of her life away from the spotlight, building her own artistic legacy in the world of tribal and fusion dance. But in a rare public conversation at a cultural event, she was asked what it was like growing up with one of rock's most iconic voices. Her response was both tender and profound. "My father never wore his grief on his sleeve. He carried it in his voice." She said her words carrying the weight of decades. He gave everything to his audiences, but he always saved something for us. His silence, his listening, his love. That simple admission confirmed what many long believed, that behind the mystique of Robert Plant was a father, forever marked by loss, yet still striving to be present, gentle, and human. Carmen shared stories of him reading poetry to her as a child, or humming lullabies with melodies that never made it to record. These were the unsung verses of a man known for anthems in her own right. Carmen has carried the torch of artistic expression, not through vocals, but through movement. Her performances often evoke the same haunting power her father brought to the stage, a testament to how deeply art and pain are passed down. She speaks of watching him from the wings, not just as a fan, but as a daughter, sensing the emotion he channeled into every performance. Sometimes I saw him relive things he never said out loud, she once noted, and that was his way of healing. Robert Plant's later years have become a study in quiet resilience and dignified aging. He continues to explore new musical territories, often fusing global influences with introspective lyrics. His recent collaborations, such as those with Alison Crouch, show an artist no longer chasing fame but meaning, and in this journey inward, his true nature. Once masked by the roar of Led Zeppelin's storm, emerges with grace those close to Plant. Describe a man who values connection over applause, who exchanges arenas for quiet dinners, and who spends more time with nature than with critics. His friends recall his quiet generosity, his fondness for folklore, and his unshakable loyalty to those he loves. Despite the fame, he never built a palace. He built a sanctuary, a space for reflection, family, and music. His quiet strength, both on stage and off, shaped a new archetype of the rock legend, not just as a larger-than-life figure, but as a deeply feeling, fiercely present human, being in an industry often driven by excess and ego. Robert Plant stood out for his emotional depth, poetic soul, and unwavering dedication to truth in music and in life. Plant has also become something of a mentor, inspiring a new generation of musicians to embrace honesty over perfection. Artists today cite him not only for his powerful vocals, but for the vulnerability he never feared, showing his influence extends beyond stage and song into the way we talk about grief, aging art, and identity. Carmen's presence in his life is a daily reminder of what endures. When the lights fade in interviews, Plant often avoids talking about legacy. But when he does, it's never about awards or records. It's about people. It's about whether he made someone feel something real. One anecdote Carmen shared in her talk captured this perfectly. Once, when I was about to perform in a show, he handed me a small pendant with a quote, "Inside, sing with your feet on fire." I asked what it meant. He smiled and said it means don't hold back ever. That's what he gave me. Not fame, not fortune, fire, and that is Robert Plant's quiet legacy. A fire passed on, not shouted into microphones, but whispered in poetry and lived in footsteps. His life, with all its highs and heartbreaks, continues to echo in the gentlest of ways. He remains a father, a lover of words, a wanderer between melodies and memories. The myth of the rock god may belong to history, but the soul of the man still sings through. Carmen's words through the music, still playing through the unspoken love that holds families together in silence. We hear him not in a scream, but in a whisper. In that truth, the legend lives on, not through spectacle, but through spirit. And perhaps that's the most powerful encore of all reasonable size. If you start getting too clever, obviously, people come along with the success that we've had at 76. Robert Plant no longer walks the firelit stages that once trembled beneath his voice, but the echoes remain not just in the music, but in the silence that followed behind the curls, the thunder, the unforgettable howl of Led Zeppelin. Lived a man who knew loss, who lived love, and who learned with time to find beauty in stillness. He has lived through grief that broke him through fame, that nearly consumed him, and through reinvention that quietly saved him. And today, his legacy no longer rests in platinum records or sold-out tours. It rests in the way he loved his family, the way he mentored through example, and the way his daughter now carries forward his fire, because some stories don't end in applause, they end in reflection, in late-night melodies, in whispered poems in hands, held without words, and perhaps that is the mark of a life fully lived, not how loud it was, but how deeply it was felt. So if Robert Plant's journey ever walked beside yours through heartbreak, through healing, or through memory, tell us what song of his still plays in the background of your life. We'd be honored to read your story and to celebrate the quiet legacy that lives on in all of us.